The sound of the slap echoed through the massive, crystal-chandeliered dining room like a gunshot. For a fraction of a second, the entire Whitmore family estate froze. The clinking of heavy silver forks stopped. The soft murmurs of high society conversation died in the throats of 24 extended family members. My head was turned slightly to the left from the sheer force of the impact. The skin on my cheek burned, a hot, stinging red mark blossoming across my face. I didn't immediately look back at the woman who had struck me. I looked down at my hands, resting perfectly still on the starched, white linen tablecloth, right in front of the heavy, carved mahogany chair at the head of the table. "You do not belong in that chair," a high, hysterical voice shrieked. I slowly turned my head. Standing over me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a manic, manufactured sense of righteous indignation, was Vanessa Reed. Vanessa was 28. She was wearing an expensive, emerald green silk dress that I instantly recognized because my husband's mother had supposedly purchased it. But Vanessa wasn't a cousin. She wasn't an aunt. She wasn't a Whitmore by blood or by marriage. She was my husband's new executive assistant. "That seat," Vanessa pointed a trembling finger at the carved head of the table where I sat, "is reserved for the head of the Whitmore family. Dominic should be sitting there, not you. You are disrespecting the entire hierarchy of this estate." She had crossed a line so fundamental, so deeply insane, that for a moment, the sheer audacity of it suspended reality. An employee had walked into a private family dinner, approached the wife of her boss, and physically assaulted her for sitting in the wrong chair. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up from the head of the table. I was 34 years old, wearing a tailored cream suit, and I had spent the last 3 years keeping this family from eating itself alive. I looked Vanessa dead in the eyes. I raised my right hand, and with a swift, perfectly calculated motion, I slapped her across the face. I didn't slap her hysterically. I slapped her with the precision of a metronome. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp, stumbling backward, her hands flying to her cheek. Tears instantly welled in her eyes. She looked frantically toward the center of the table, exactly where my husband, Dominic Whitmore, was sitting. "Dominic!" Vanessa sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly. "She hit me." I turned to look at my husband. Dominic was 36, the golden boy heir to Whitmore Holdings. He possessed the polished, handsome exterior of a man born into old money. But beneath the cashmere sweaters and the Rolex watches, he was emotionally hollow. He didn't leap from his chair to defend me. He didn't order his assistant out of his family home for assaulting his wife. He stood up, his face flushed with embarrassment, and he looked directly at me. "Celeste, what is wrong with you?" Dominic demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "Why would you resort to violence? You're making a scene in front of the entire family." I stared at him. The air in my lungs turned to ice. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't demand to know why another woman had laid her hands on me. He saw his assistant slap his wife, and when I defended myself, he suddenly discovered his moral compass. "She struck me first, Dominic," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "She is just passionate about the family traditions." Beatrice Whitmore, my mother-in-law, suddenly piped up from her seat near the center of the table. Beatrice was 61, a woman who wore her arrogance like armor. "Vanessa understands the dignity of the Whitmore name. You, Celeste, clearly do not. Sitting at the head of the table is incredibly presumptuous. You are not a Whitmore by blood. You lack grace." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the dining room. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, people whose lives I had quietly subsidized for years, were nodding in agreement. They were taking her side. Vanessa stood near Dominic, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips, hidden behind her manicured hands. She had successfully infiltrated the dining room. She had challenged my position, and the family had backed her. Dominic looked at me, letting out a heavy, disappointed sigh. "Just apologize, Celeste. Apologize to Vanessa, and move to the side of the table so we can eat in peace." He wanted me to swallow the humiliation. He wanted me to accept being struck by his assistant so he wouldn't have to deal with the discomfort of setting a boundary. He wanted me to be the perfect, obedient wife who absorbed the toxicity of his family without complaining. I looked around the room. I looked at Beatrice in her expensive jewelry. I looked at the extravagant floral centerpieces. I looked at the 24 guests waiting for their 5-course catered meal. They believed they were sitting at a table of power. They believed the mahogany chair I had just vacated was a symbol of their inherent superiority. They had absolutely no idea how this estate actually functioned. I reached down to my left hand. I gripped the heavy 3-carat diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band that Dominic had given me. I slid them both off my finger. The metal felt incredibly cold as it left my skin. I didn't throw the rings at him. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up a thick, vintage leather book. It was the estate ledger. It had belonged to Adelaide Whitmore, Dominic's late grandmother, the true matriarch of the family. Before she died 3 years ago, she hadn't given the ledger to Dominic. She hadn't given it to Beatrice. She had given it to me, along with a very specific, handwritten rule. I placed the heavy leather ledger directly in the center of the table, right where I had been sitting. I placed my wedding rings on top of the worn leather cover. "Celeste? What are you doing?" Dominic asked, his voice suddenly losing its confident edge. I didn't answer him. I looked directly at Vanessa. "Adelaide Whitmore established a very clear rule before she passed away," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "She wrote it on the first page of that ledger. Whoever manages the accounts leads the table." Vanessa blinked, looking confused. Beatrice scoffed loudly. "I sat at the head of this table," I continued, sweeping my gaze across the silent family members, "because for the last 3 years, I am the only reason this table still exists." I picked up my purse. "If Vanessa wants my seat so desperately," I announced, turning toward the massive dining room doors, "she can start by paying the bills. Enjoy your dinner." "Celeste, get back here," Dominic barked, his pride flaring up. "Don't you dare walk out on this family." I didn't stop. I pushed open the heavy double doors and walked into the grand hallway. "Mrs. Whitmore," I paused. Ruth Bell, the 58-year-old head housekeeper, was hurrying down the hallway toward me. She had worked for the estate for 20 years. She had seen the slap. She had seen everything. "Are you leaving, ma'am?" Ruth asked, her voice tight with genuine concern. "Yes, Ruth," I said quietly, touching my stinging cheek. "I am going back to the Manhattan penthouse to pack." Ruth looked at the dining room doors, then back at me. Who is going to sign for the catering delivery, ma'am? The head chef is in the kitchen waiting for the final wire transfer." I pulled my phone out of my purse. I opened my banking application. "No one is going to sign for it, Ruth," I replied. I tapped the screen. I navigated to the scheduled payments tab. I didn't just cancel the catering bill. I went down the list. Cancel. Estate landscaping services. Cancel. Whitmore pool maintenance. Cancel. Beatrice Whitmore monthly allowance. Asterisk cancel. Greenwich Country Club dues. Cancel. Estate security subscription in less than 60 seconds. I canceled 7 automated wire transfers. I severed the financial arteries that kept the Whitmore family illusion alive. "The safety net is gone, Ruth," I said, looking at the loyal housekeeper. "If I were you, I would take a very long vacation." I walked out the front doors of the Greenwich estate, climbed into my car, and drove into the night. By the time I reached our Manhattan penthouse, my phone had 42 missed calls. Half were from Dominic, demanding to know where I was. The other half were from various estate vendors, aggressively demanding payment for services rendered. The chaos had begun. I walked into the penthouse, locked the door, and went straight to the home office. I didn't pack my clothes yet. I needed my records. I pulled out my laptop, my external hard drives, and my thick physical folders filled with receipts, wire transfer confirmations, and vendor contracts. 2 hours later, I heard the front door of the penthouse slam open. "Celeste," Dominic roared, his heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway. He burst into the home office. He was furious, his tie ripped off, his hair disheveled. The polished, elegant air was gone, replaced by a man who had just spent 2 hours dealing with the humiliating reality of unpaid bills. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Dominic screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "The catering company packed up the food and left. They threatened to call the police for theft of services." My mother had to order pizza for my Uncle Conrad. Pizza, Celeste, at a family memorial dinner. Did you pay for the pizza? Dominic? I asked calmly, organizing a stack of invoices on my desk. My card was declined, Dominic yelled, his face turning a deep, ugly shade of red. The estate account is frozen. What did you do to the accounts? I didn't touch the estate accounts, Dominic, I replied, looking up at him. The estate accounts have been empty for 2 years. Adelaide left behind the house, but she didn't leave behind a massive trust fund to maintain it. The market crash wiped out the liquid assets. Dominic froze. The anger in his eyes was suddenly replaced by genuine, complete confusion. What are you talking about? He stammered. The estate has been running perfectly. The staff is paid. The landscaping is done. My mother's country club dues are paid. I turned my laptop screen around so he could see it. Look at the screen, Dominic, I commanded softly. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet I had opened. It was a master ledger, detailing exactly where the money for the estate had been coming from for the last 36 months. The estate landscaping? I read aloud. Paid from my personal savings account. The staff payroll? Paid from the dividends of my premarital investment portfolio. Your mother's country club dues? Paid by me. The $25,000 catering bill for tonight's dinner? It was scheduled to be paid by me. Dominic stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. You thought I was sitting at the head of the table because I was arrogant, I said, the cold truth finally rushing out. I was sitting at the head of the table because I have been funding this family's entire existence. I am the only reason your mother hasn't been laughed out of Greenwich. I am the reason your Uncle Conrad hasn't noticed the family trust is functionally bankrupt. No, Dominic whispered, shaking his head. No, my mother told me the trust was fine. She said you were just managing the logistics. Your mother lied, I stated bluntly. Your mother uses my money to maintain the illusion of old money wealth, and then she allows your assistant to slap me in the face for lacking grace. Well, the illusion is over. I cut the wire transfers. If she wants the lawn mowed tomorrow, she can ask Vanessa to pay for it. Dominic sank into the leather chair opposite my desk. The reality of his family's utter financial dependence on the woman he had just publicly humiliated was crushing him. Celeste, please, Dominic said, his voice dropping into a desperate, pleading register. He rubbed his hands over his face. This is a misunderstanding, Vanessa. Vanessa was just stressed. She's new. She didn't understand the dynamics. I'll fire her on Monday. I promise. Just turn the transfers back on. The family will be a laughingstock if the vendors start gossiping. You don't get it, Dominic, I said softly, reaching into my desk drawer. I pulled out the heavy titanium debit card linked to the primary estate account, the account I had been quietly funding with my own money for years. I picked up a pair of heavy brass scissors. Vanessa didn't slap me. Because she was stressed, I said, staring directly into my husband's eyes. Vanessa slapped me because she felt comfortable doing it. She felt entitled to that space. She felt entitled to correct me in front of your family. I placed the debit card between the blades of the scissors. And she felt entitled to do that, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. Because you let her. You let her answer your personal phone. You let her buy your mother's birthday gifts. You let her sit next to you at corporate galas. You blurred the lines, Dominic. You wanted to feel important. You wanted 2 women fighting over you. You opened the door to our marriage and let a stranger walk in. That's not true, Dominic protested weakly. She's just an assistant. Then let the assistant pay the bills, I replied. Snap. The brass scissors sliced through the titanium card, snapping it cleanly in half. I dropped the 2 pieces of the card onto the desk. The safety net is cut, I declared. I am resigning as the estate manager. I am resigning as the family banker. And I am resigning as your wife. You can't do this, Dominic shouted, panic finally overriding his shame. We are married. You can't just abandon the family like this. My mother will be destroyed. The house will fall apart. It's already falling apart, Dominic, I said, closing my laptop. You just couldn't see the rot because I kept painting over it. But starting tomorrow morning, I am bringing the receipts to the family. I am going to show them exactly how much it costs to pretend to be a Whitmore. I stood up, picked up my laptop bag, and walked toward the door of the home office. Celeste, Dominic begged, following me down the hallway. Where are you going? I am going to a hotel tonight, I said, pulling my suitcase from the hall closet. I had packed it while he was driving back from Greenwich. And tomorrow morning, I am going back to the estate. To apologize? Dominic asked, a desperate, delusional hope flickering in his eyes. I stopped with my hand on the front doorknob. I looked back at the cowardly man I had married. No, Dominic. I smiled coldly. I'm going back to collect my debts. I walked out of the penthouse, leaving him standing alone in the massive, silent apartment. The slap at the dinner table hadn't broken my marriage. It had simply shown me who had already broken it, and I was never going to fight for a seat at a table where everyone expected me to pay the bill and swallow the insult ever again. Tomorrow, the real audit was going to begin, and the Whitmore family was going to learn exactly how expensive disrespect could be. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., I drove my car through the towering wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate. The sprawling, ivy-covered mansion looked the same as it always did, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable wealth. But as I walked up the marble steps and pushed open the massive front doors, the atmosphere inside was entirely different. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was frantic. I walked into the grand parlor. Beatrice, Dominic, and Uncle Conrad were standing near the fireplace, arguing in hushed, panicked tones. They stopped the moment I entered. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress or a perfect, compliant smile. I was wearing a sharp, tailored black blazer, and I was carrying a thick, red legal folder. Celeste, Beatrice snapped, stepping forward, her face drawn and tired. This has gone far enough. The catering company threatened to file a lawsuit this morning. I had to beg Conrad to wire them the funds from his personal account to avoid a scandal. You cannot just cut off the estate's liquidity over a petty squabble with an assistant. It wasn't a squabble, Beatrice, I replied evenly, setting the red folder down on the mahogany coffee table. It was an assault, and it wasn't the estate's liquidity. It was mine. Uncle Conrad, a 64-year-old man who prided himself on being the rational elder of the family, cleared his throat. Now, Celeste, be reasonable, Conrad said, adopting a soothing, patriarchal tone. We are family. We understand you were hurt, but families don't operate like corporate entities. We share the burdens. We protect the name. Dominic has assured us that the assistant will be severely reprimanded, but we cannot have you holding the family hostage financially. Hostage? I raised an eyebrow, opening the red folder. Conrad, in the last 36 months, the Whitmore estate has hosted 39 formal banquets, memorial dinners, and charity galas. Do you know how many of those I personally paid for? Conrad frowned, looking at Dominic, who immediately looked at the floor. I assumed the family trust 28. I stated clearly. I paid for 28 of them. I subsidized the family's social standing to the tune of over $600,000. I didn't do it to buy power. I did it because I respected Adelaide's legacy, and I wanted to help Dominic maintain the estate while the trust recovered. But I will no longer fund my own disrespect. I pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and slid it across the coffee table toward Beatrice. Speaking of disrespect, I said, my voice hardening, before we discuss the larger debts, we need to discuss a very specific, very immediate discrepancy. Beatrice picked up the paper, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted her reading glasses. What is this? That is an invoice for last night's caviar, I explained. The invoice, submitted to me by Vanessa Reed on Tuesday, requests a wire transfer of $48,000 for premium beluga caviar from our traditional Russian supplier in Manhattan. Yes, it was excellent. Conrad nodded approvingly. Adelaide always insisted on beluga for the memorial dinner. It wasn't beluga, Conrad, I corrected him sharply. It was lumpfish. The parlor went dead silent. Conrad, an old money purist whose palate was legendary in Greenwich, turned completely pale. Lumpfish? Conrad choked out, looking physically ill. You served us lumpfish? I didn't serve it, I replied. Vanessa ordered it. I pulled out a second piece of paper and laid it on the table. When I canceled the caterer's wire transfer last night, I received a frantic call from the head chef, I explained, leaning back in my chair, projecting the authority of an auditor closing a trap. He was furious. He told me that Vanessa had specifically instructed him to cancel the beluga order on Wednesday morning. She told him to purchase a high-end, visually similar lumpfish substitute for $6,000. Why would she do that? Beatrice demanded, looking genuinely horrified by the culinary faux pas. Because, I said, pointing to the original invoice, Vanessa still submitted the $48,000 invoice to me. She intended for me to wire the full amount to a newly registered vendor account, an account that, according to the routing numbers, she set up herself. Dominic's head snapped up. What? Are you accusing her of stealing? I'm not accusing her, Dominic, I said coldly. I'm documenting it. She swapped the caviar, served this family cheap lumpfish, and attempted to pocket the $42,000 difference. Your assistant isn't just violently protective of the family hierarchy. She's committing vendor fraud right under your nose. Right on cue, the heavy doors of the parlor opened. Ruth Bell, the head housekeeper, stepped into the room. She was holding a stack of delivery receipts on a silver tray. Excuse me, Mr. Whitmore, Ruth said, her voice perfectly neutral, though her eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction. Mrs. Whitmore requested I pull the delivery logs for the kitchen from the past week. Ruth handed the tray to Dominic. Dominic looked down at the receipts. His face flushed a dark, humiliating red as he saw Vanessa's signature authorizing the delivery of the cheaper substitute from a discount supplier, deliberately bypassing the estate's traditional vendors. She stole from us, Conrad whispered, his patriarchal calm completely fracturing. He looked at Dominic, his eyes blazing with sudden, furious disgust. You allowed a common thief into this house? You allowed her to handle the estate accounts? And you let her strike your wife? Uncle Conrad, I didn't know, Dominic stammered, frantically looking at the receipts. I swear, I had no idea she was doing this. You had no idea because you weren't paying attention, I said, standing up from my chair. You let her cross professional boundaries because it fed your ego. You let her play house. Well, she played you, Dominic, and she used my money to do it. I closed the red folder. I am going to the archive room to conduct a full audit of every single invoice Vanessa has touched in the last 6 months, I announced to the silent parlor. I suggest you figure out how you are going to repay me for the 28 banquets. Because if the money isn't accounted for, I will hand this entire folder over to my divorce attorney on Monday morning. I walked out of the parlor, leaving Dominic to face the wrath of his deeply embarrassed, incredibly furious uncle. I didn't go straight to the archive room. I walked down the long, portrait-lined hallway toward the family chapel. The Whitmore family chapel was a small, beautiful stone building attached to the east wing of the estate. It was where Adelaide Whitmore's memorial tea was supposed to be held later that afternoon. As I approached the heavy wooden doors, I heard voices inside. Move the floral arrangements closer to the altar, a high, bossy voice commanded. And swap the seating cards on the front pew. I want Mrs. Whitmore in the center. I pushed the doors open. Vanessa was standing in the center of the chapel, wearing a conservative, high-necked black dress, holding a clipboard, and directing 3 estate staff members. When she saw me enter, she froze. The confident, bossy demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. She instinctively touched the cheek I had slapped the night before. What are you doing here? Vanessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's mother explicitly put me in charge of organizing the memorial tea. You are not needed. Beatrice was trying to punish me. By assigning Vanessa to organize the memorial tea, Beatrice was trying to publicly replace me, signaling to the family that the assistant was now handling the duties of the wife. It was a pathetic, transparent power play. I walked slowly down the center aisle of the chapel, my heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. I didn't look angry. I looked like a woman inspecting a poorly managed construction site. You're in charge of the tea? I asked softly, stopping a few feet away from her. Yes, Vanessa said, lifting her chin, trying to project authority. And since you've decided to abandon your duties, I am making sure the family is taken care of. I looked past her, examining the seating chart she had laid out on the front pews. You put Aunt Lenora in the second row, I noted calmly. She's a widow, Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I were incredibly dense. The front row is reserved for the immediate active patriarchs of the family: Conrad, Dominic, and Beatrice. I turned to look at her. The sheer, profound ignorance of the woman was almost breathtaking. She had watched a few movies about old money, bought a nice dress, and thought she understood the intricate, deeply ingrained social laws of a family that had been here for a century. Lenora Whitmore is Adelaide's eldest living sister, I explained, my voice echoing coldly in the stone chapel. In this family, widows of her generation do not sit in the second row. They are placed in the center of the front pew as a sign of absolute reverence. Putting her in the second row isn't a logistical choice, Vanessa. It is a profound, unforgivable public insult. Vanessa's face flushed. She glanced nervously at the seating cards. Beatrice approved the layout. Beatrice is a narcissist who hasn't looked at a seating chart in 10 years because I have been doing it for her, I replied smoothly. I walked over to the dessert table, set up near the side exit. And these? I asked, pointing to a massive silver tray, piled high with beautiful, dark chocolate truffles. They're imported, Vanessa said defensively, crossing her arms. They cost $400 a box. They are a staple of high society memorials. Conrad is deathly allergic to cocoa powder, I stated flatly. If he eats one of those truffles, he will go into anaphylactic shock within 5 minutes. And since you placed the tray directly next to the exit he uses, you have essentially set a lethal trap for the family elder. Vanessa's eyes widened in horror. She looked at the truffles, then back at me, the clipboard trembling in her hands. Rules are not decoration, Vanessa, I said, stepping closer to her, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. The traditions, the allergies, the seating charts, they aren't just snobby rich people games. They are the structural integrity of this family. I didn't spend 3 years managing this estate because I liked the silver. I did it to keep these people from accidentally destroying themselves. The doors of the chapel burst open. Dominic practically sprinted down the aisle. He looked frantic, his eyes darting between me and Vanessa. Celeste, Conrad is demanding to see the vendor contracts, Dominic panted, his chest heaving. He looked at Vanessa, his expression twisting into a mixture of betrayal and panic. He knows about the caviar, Vanessa. He knows about the lumpfish. Vanessa let out a small, terrified gasp. She dropped the clipboard onto the stone floor. Dominic, I can explain. It was a mistake. The supplier messed up the order. The supplier didn't route $42,000 to a personal bank account, I corrected her coldly. Dominic stared at his assistant, the woman he had allowed to answer his phone, the woman he had allowed to strike his wife, the woman he had used to stroke his fragile ego, had just humiliated him in front of the only uncle he respected. Get out, Dominic ordered, his voice shaking with sudden, intense fury. Vanessa blinked, tears instantly springing to her eyes. Dominic, please. You said I belonged here. You said I was better at this than she was. I said, get out of the chapel, Vanessa. Dominic roared, pointing toward the doors. Get out of the estate. Don't come back until I call you. Vanessa let out a loud, dramatic sob, grabbed her purse, and ran down the aisle, pushing past Dominic and fleeing out the heavy wooden doors. The chapel was silent again. Dominic stood in the center aisle, looking completely broken. He looked at the seating chart. He looked at the chocolate truffles. He realized, finally, that he had traded a woman who held his world together for a woman who didn't even know how to set the table. Celeste, Dominic whispered, looking at me with incredibly hollow eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was stealing. I didn't know she was this incompetent. Please, you have to help me fix this. Conrad is going to demand a full audit of my company if he thinks I can't even manage an assistant. I looked at the man I had married. He wasn't apologizing for the slap. He wasn't apologizing for the betrayal. He was apologizing because he had been caught, and he wanted me to clean up his mess so he wouldn't look incompetent in front of his family. I know you didn't know about the money, Dominic, I said softly, picking up the discarded clipboard from the floor. But you did know about her. What do you mean? He stammered. I didn't start investigating Vanessa last night. I revealed, the absolute truth finally stepping out of the shadows. I started investigating her 2 months ago, when she answered your personal cell phone at midnight while you were in a meeting. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. I knew exactly who she was trying to be. Dominic's face turned completely pale. You knew. I knew, I confirmed. I waited. I watched you blur the boundaries. I watched you invite her to galas. I watched you let her plan this memorial tea. I wanted to see if you would ever draw a line. I wanted to see if you would ever protect me. I dropped the clipboard onto the front pew. You didn't, I said, my voice empty of any lingering affection. You used her to test me. You wanted to see if I would fight for you. Well, Dominic, you got your answer. I'm not fighting for you. I'm auditing you. I turned and walked past him, heading toward the side exit of the chapel. Celeste, where are you going? Dominic yelled desperately. To the archive room, I replied over my shoulder. I suggest you go find Beatrice. She's going to need to explain a few things before the family meeting this evening. The archive room of the Whitmore estate was located in the basement. It was a massive, climate-controlled vault filled with filing cabinets, old leather-bound ledgers, and decades of financial history. I spent the next 6 hours locked inside the vault with Ruth Bell. We didn't just look for Vanessa's fraudulent invoices. We dug deeper. Once the illusion of the perfect family was broken, the rot became incredibly easy to find. Look at this, Mrs. Whitmore, Ruth said quietly, handing me a stack of credit card statements from Beatrice's personal account. I reviewed the statements. My stomach turned. 3 months ago, Beatrice had come to me, crying hysterically. She claimed she had made a terrible mistake on a real estate investment and desperately needed $12,000 to avoid defaulting on a loan that would publicly humiliate the family. She begged me not to tell Dominic, citing her fragile pride. I had wired her the $12,000 from my personal savings. I looked at the credit card statement Ruth handed me. The $12,000 hadn't gone to a bank. It had gone to Oscar de la Renta. Beatrice had used my money to purchase a custom-fitted emerald green silk gala gown. The exact same gown Vanessa Reed had worn when she slapped me in the face. My mother-in-law had taken my money, bought a dress for my husband's mistress, and then allowed that mistress to sit at my dining table and assault me. She bought that dress, I whispered, the sheer, breathtaking malice of the act finally settling into my bones. Yes, ma'am, Ruth confirmed, her face a mask of quiet disgust. I saw Beatrice hand the dress box to Miss Reed in the parlor 2 days before the dinner. She told her she looked much more suitable for the Whitmore name than you did. I closed the file. The anger I had felt the night before was gone. It was replaced by a freezing, absolute clarity. This wasn't just about Dominic being a coward. This was a systemic, multi-generational exploitation. They didn't just use me for my money. They used my money to fund my own replacement. Ruth, I said, standing up from the archive table. Yes, ma'am? Gather these files. Put them in the red folder, I instructed, my voice sharp and decisive. And tell the kitchen staff they are officially off duty for the evening. If the family wants to eat tonight, they can order takeout. With pleasure, ma'am. Ruth nodded, a rare, fierce smile crossing her face. At 7 p.m., I walked into the grand parlor. The family had gathered. It wasn't a dinner party, it was an emergency council. Conrad was sitting in the high-backed leather armchair by the fireplace, looking grim. Dominic was pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair. Beatrice was sitting on the sofa, aggressively fanning herself, trying to maintain her aura of aristocratic superiority despite the chaos. And standing awkwardly near the doorway, looking terrified and clutching her expensive purse, was Vanessa. Dominic hadn't fired her. He hadn't banished her. He had called her back to the estate, likely hoping to force a mutual apology to smooth over the tension with Conrad. I walked to the center of the room and placed the thick, red legal folder on the coffee table. Ah, Celeste, Conrad said, his voice heavy with patriarchal exhaustion. Dominic tells me you've been in the archives all day. I hope you've calmed down and we can discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding reasonably. There is no misunderstanding, Conrad, I said, remaining standing. I called this meeting to present my terms of resignation. Beatrice scoffed, rolling her eyes. Resignation? You are a wife, Celeste, not an employee. Stop being so dramatic. Vanessa is prepared to offer you a formal apology for losing her temper, provided you apologize for escalating the violence. Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes welling with strategic tears. I am sorry, Celeste. I was just so overwhelmed by the stress of the memorial. I didn't mean to. Save it. I cut her off, my voice cracking like a whip. I don't want your apology, Vanessa. I want your bank statements. Vanessa's mouth snapped shut. I am not here to negotiate a truce, I announced to the room, placing my hand flat on the red folder. I am here to collect my debts. And I am not leaving this estate until every single one of you understands exactly what it is going to cost you. I opened the folder. The formal family accounting was about to begin. I opened the thick red legal folder and pulled out a stack of meticulously organized documents, placing them on the coffee table one by one. I am not interested in apologies, I said, looking around the grand parlor. I am interested in restitution. Here are my terms. I tapped the first document, item 1. The $650,000 I have spent over the last 36 months, subsidizing the Whitmore estate's social events, every catering bill, every floral arrangement, every valet service. I have the wire transfer receipts, and I expect the Whitmore Family Trust to reimburse me in full. Conrad shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Celeste, the trust is not as liquid as it used to be. $650,000 is a significant capital drain. Then I suggest you sell one of the guest houses, Conrad, I replied smoothly. Because if you do not reimburse me, I will file a civil suit for unjust enrichment, and I will subpoena the trust's financial records, making your lack of liquidity a matter of public record in Greenwich. Conrad's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew I had him cornered. I tapped the second document. It was a printed spreadsheet outlining Beatrice's personal loans. Item 2, I continued, turning my attention to my mother-in-law. Beatrice Whitmore currently owes me $300,000. This includes the emergency real estate loan she requested 3 months ago, which she subsequently used to purchase the emerald green gala gown Vanessa is wearing right now. Dominic's head whipped toward his mother. Mom, you took money from Celeste to buy Vanessa a dress? Beatrice flushed a deep, ugly red, her hands gripping the armrests of the sofa. I was protecting the family image. Celeste's wardrobe is incredibly dull. Vanessa represented the youthful vitality the Whitmore name needed at that gala. You used my wife's money to dress my assistant? Dominic shouted, the sheer humiliation of his mother's actions finally breaking through his denial. Are you insane? Don't you dare raise your voice to me, Dominic. Beatrice snapped back, her aristocratic facade cracking. I did what was necessary to maintain our social standing. You were the one parading her around town. Item 3, I interrupted loudly, cutting through their toxic bickering. I pulled out the invoice for the caviar and the delivery receipts Ruth had provided. I slid them across the table toward Vanessa. Vanessa Reed, I stated coldly. You committed vendor fraud. You intercepted $42,000 of estate funds by swapping beluga caviar for lumpfish and routing the difference to a personal account. I have the routing numbers. I have the delivery logs. Vanessa shrank back against the wall, her face pale, her hands trembling violently. I expect that $42,000 returned to my account by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I commanded. Furthermore, you will write a formal, signed apology admitting to the theft and acknowledging the assault you committed against me last night. If you do not, I will press criminal charges for fraud, and I will file a civil suit for battery. Dominic, please. Vanessa sobbed, looking at my husband with desperate, pleading eyes. I don't have $42,000. I spent it. You have to help me. Dominic didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, absolutely paralyzed by his own cowardice. He had let this woman into his life because she stroked his ego, and now she was begging him to save her from a federal crime. Item 4, I said, ignoring Vanessa's tears. I pulled out a fresh, uncreased document. I am filing for divorce, I announced, looking directly at Dominic. The division of assets will be equitable, but you will assume the entirety of the debt on the Manhattan penthouse, as I will be vacating the premises permanently. Dominic looked up at me, his eyes wide, looking completely shattered. Celeste, no. Please, we can fix this. I'll fire Vanessa. I'll pay you back. We can go to counseling. Which brings me to my fifth and final condition, I said softly, the anger finally bleeding out of my voice, leaving only a profound, hollow exhaustion. I looked at the man who had promised to love and protect me. You will admit it, Dominic, I demanded quietly. You will look me in the eye, in front of your uncle and your mother, and you will admit that Vanessa didn't just overstep her bounds. You will admit that you opened the door. You let her answer your phone. You let her organize the memorial. You let her wear the dress your mother bought her with my money. You wanted two women fighting over you because it made you feel powerful. You let her slap me, Dominic, because you were too much of a coward to tell her no. Dominic stared at me. His mouth opened, but he couldn't speak. The truth was too heavy, too undeniable. He couldn't hide behind the excuse of a stressed assistant anymore. He had fundamentally failed as a husband, and he knew it. Before Dominic could formulate a response, Beatrice suddenly let out a sharp, ragged gasp. We all turned to look at her. Beatrice was gripping her chest, her face turning an alarming shade of gray. She leaned forward, clutching her stomach, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Mom?" Dominic asked, stepping toward her. I can't breathe," Beatrice gasped, her eyes wide with sudden, genuine panic. "My chest, it burns." She slumped sideways against the armrest of the sofa. "Call 911, Conrad shouted, leaping out of his chair. Panic erupted in the parlor. Dominic rushed to his mother's side, loosening the collar of her blouse. Vanessa stood frozen against the wall, useless and terrified. I didn't panic. I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services, calmly providing the estate's address and Beatrice's symptoms. "Celeste, what is happening to her?" Dominic yelled frantically, holding his mother's hand. "Is it her heart? You know her medical history. What is going on? It looks like a severe allergic reaction or an acute gastrointestinal attack," I replied, ending the call with the dispatcher. "Allergic reaction?" Conrad demanded, turning to look at the dining table in the adjacent room, where the family had been drinking tea before the meeting. "To what?" "We only had the tea and the pastries Vanessa brought from the bakery." I looked at Vanessa. "Vanessa?" I said sharply. "What did you feed her?" Vanessa shook her head rapidly, her eyes wide with terror. "Nothing. I just brought the almond croissants from the patisserie downtown. Beatrice said they were her favorite." I closed my eyes, letting out a slow, deeply frustrated breath. "Beatrice is severely allergic to almonds, Vanessa," I said, the absolute incompetence of the woman finally putting a life at risk. "She doesn't eat almond croissants. She eats the plain butter croissants from a specific bakery in so the almond ones are for Conrad." I didn't know," Vanessa cried, defense. "No one told me." "I told you," I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. "I sent the comprehensive family medical and dietary restriction file to the family group chat 3 times in the last month. You were added to that chat by Dominic 2 weeks ago. You specifically replied to the file. Vanessa, Celeste, this is your fault." Beatrice gasped from the sofa, her misplaced anger overriding her pain. "You are the estate manager. You are supposed to monitor the food." "I resigned this morning, Beatrice," I reminded her coldly. "You put Vanessa in charge of the memorial tea. You trusted her with the catering. You get what you pay for." The distant wail of an ambulance siren echoed through the Greenwich night. Paramedics rushed into the parlor minutes later. They quickly assessed Beatrice, administered an epinephrine auto-injector, and loaded her onto a stretcher. "We need a family member to accompany her to the hospital to provide medical history," the lead paramedic announced. Dominic looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Celeste, please. You know her doctors. You know her prescriptions." I looked at him. I looked at the woman on the stretcher who had used my money to buy a dress for his mistress. "I'll drive separately," I said. "Bring her file." 45 minutes later, we were standing in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the Greenwich Hospital emergency room waiting area. Dominic was pacing nervously. Conrad was sitting in a plastic chair, looking exhausted and old. Vanessa had followed us to the hospital, hovering near Dominic, desperately trying to insert herself back into the narrative as a supportive figure. A doctor walked through the double doors, holding a tablet. "Family of Beatrice Whitmore," the doctor asked. We all gathered around. "She is stable," the doctor assured us, and a collective sigh of relief washed over Dominic and Conrad. It was a severe allergic reaction to tree nuts. The epinephrine stabilized her, but we need to monitor her overnight to ensure there isn't a biphasic reaction. "I need to speak with whoever manages her medical records." She mentioned she takes a specific blood pressure medication, but she couldn't remember the dosage. Dominic immediately turned to me. "Celeste." I didn't step forward. I unzipped my large leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, tabbed medical binder. I walked over to the doctor and handed it to him. "This is the comprehensive medical manifest for Beatrice Whitmore," I explained professionally. "It includes her complete medical history, her primary care physician's contact information, her emergency contacts, her full allergy list, and a detailed schedule of her daily medications, including exact dosages." "Excellent. This is incredibly thorough," the doctor nodded approvingly, flipping through the binder. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I am no longer managing her care, doctor," I stated clearly. I turned and looked directly at Vanessa. Vanessa shrank back slightly, her hands clutching her purse. "Vanessa," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet waiting room. "You claimed earlier that you didn't know about the almond allergy. You claimed no one told you." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the family group chat. On October 12th, at 9 a.m., I uploaded this exact medical manifest to the chat. I read aloud, holding the screen up for Conrad and Dominic to see. I explicitly stated that whoever was handling the catering for the upcoming month needed to memorize the allergy list on page 4. I scrolled down. At 9:15 a.m. on October 12th, I continued. Vanessa Reed replied to the group chat. Her message reads, "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I have downloaded the file and will memorize the restrictions immediately. Dominic and I have it covered." I lowered the phone. "You didn't read it," I said, staring at the terrified assistant. "You wanted the power of managing the estate. You wanted the prestige of organizing the events, but you didn't want to do the actual invisible labor required to keep these people alive." I turned to Dominic and Conrad. "The medical handover is officially complete," I announced. "The binder is with the doctor. The financial ledger is in the red folder at the estate. My responsibilities to the Whitmore family are permanently terminated." "Celeste, you can't just leave us like this," Dominic pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. "My mother is in the hospital. We need you." I pulled my arm away, disgusted by his touch. "You don't need me, Dominic," I said softly. "You need a nurse, an accountant, and an event planner. You just wanted me to do it for free." I walked out of the emergency room, leaving the Whitmore family to finally face the reality of their own incompetence. I didn't go back to the Manhattan penthouse. I drove across the bridge, leaving the manicured lawns of Greenwich and the towering high-rises of Manhattan behind. I drove deep into Brooklyn Heights, pulling up to a beautiful, historic brownstone. It was my late mother's apartment. I had inherited it 5 years ago, but had rented it out while I lived the old money illusion with Dominic. The tenants had moved out a month ago, and the space was empty, waiting for me. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The apartment smelled like dust and old wood, but it was quiet, it was safe, it was mine. I spent the next 2 days sleeping on an air mattress, ordering takeout, and ignoring the relentless barrage of phone calls from Dominic and Conrad. I met with my divorce attorney via Zoom, formalizing the demands I had laid out in the red folder. On Wednesday afternoon, the intercom buzzer in my apartment rang. I walked over to the security monitor. Dominic was standing on the stoop. He was holding a small white paper bag from an upscale pharmacy, looking deeply remorseful. I pressed the intercom button. "What do you want, Dominic?" "Celeste." Dominic's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding exhausted. "Please let me up. I brought you some of those expensive herbal teas you like, and some painkillers for your cheek. I just want to check on you. Please, Can I just come inside for 5 minutes? He was trying to play the caring husband. He was trying to reestablish the boundary he had allowed Vanessa to destroy, hoping that a small gesture of domestic intimacy would soften my resolve. No, Dominic, I replied, my voice hard. You are not coming inside my home. Celeste, it's me, he pleaded. It's your husband. My husband stood by while another woman slapped me in the face, I reminded him. I'll meet you at the coffee shop on the corner in 10 minutes. Bring a pen. I grabbed my coat and a manila envelope, walking down the stairs. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Dominic was already sitting in a corner booth, looking incredibly out of place in his tailored suit amidst the freelancers and artists of Brooklyn. I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't order anything. I pushed the manila envelope across the table. What is this? Dominic asked, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb. It's the formal divorce agreement, I said. My attorney drafted it according to the terms we discussed at the estate. I am relinquishing all claims to the penthouse. In exchange, the Whitmore Trust will wire the $650,000 to my account by Friday. Beatrice's personal debt will be settled through the transfer of her vintage Mercedes to my LLC, which I will promptly sell. Dominic stared at me, his eyes brimming with tears. You're really doing this. You're really walking away. I walked away the moment you asked me why I hit her back, I said softly. Dominic buried his face in his hands. I fired her, Celeste. I fired Vanessa this morning. Conrad threatened to cut me out of the family trust entirely if she ever set foot on the property again. She's gone. Firing her doesn't fix the marriage, Dominic, I replied. It just fixes your PR problem. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Ruth Bell. Mrs. Whitmore, please check Instagram. Miss Reed is posting lies. I frowned, unlocking my phone and opening the app. Vanessa, having been fired and facing a massive financial restitution demand, had decided to execute a final, desperate, scorched earth campaign. She had posted a screenshot to her Instagram story, tagging several prominent members of the Greenwich social circle. The screenshot was a bank transfer receipt. It showed a wire transfer of $20,000 from Beatrice Whitmore's personal account directly into my personal checking account, dated 6 months ago. Vanessa's caption read, "The perfect wife everyone feels sorry for has been secretly draining the Whitmore family accounts for years. She demanded $20 K from her mother-in-law just to stay married. Don't believe the victim act." Dominic saw my expression change. What? What is it? I turned the phone around to show him the post. Dominic groaned, burying his head in his hands again. She's insane. She's actually insane. She's trying to frame you for stealing to distract from the caviar fraud. She's trying to control the narrative, I corrected him, feeling a familiar, cold wave of absolute focus wash over me. She thinks a single screenshot is enough to ruin my reputation in your social circle. I didn't panic. I didn't post an angry rant in response. I opened my banking app. I found the exact transaction Vanessa had screenshotted. Then, I pulled the full, unredacted transaction history. I took a screenshot of my own. I posted it directly to my social media, tagging Vanessa, Dominic, and Uncle Conrad. My screenshot showed the $20,000 entering my account from Beatrice. But it also showed exactly where that $20,000 went 30 seconds later. It was wired directly to a high-end luxury rehabilitation clinic in Arizona, with a memo line that read, "Inpatient treatment deposit for Graham Whitmore. Graham was Conrad's son. He had quietly struggled with addiction for years, a secret the family guarded with their lives." Beatrice had asked me to funnel the money through my account to hide the payment from Conrad, who had threatened to cut Graham off financially if he relapsed again. I didn't just clear my name. I detonated a nuclear bomb in the center of the Whitmore family's deepest, most heavily guarded secrets. Within 5 minutes, my phone began to ring. It was Uncle Conrad. I answered the call, placing it on speakerphone so Dominic could hear. "Cest." Conrad's voice was shaking, a mixture of profound shock and deep, agonizing humiliation. "Is it true? Did Beatrice use you to hide Graham's relapse from me?" I looked at Dominic, who was staring at the table in absolute horror. "Yes, Conrad," I replied calmly. "Beatrice wired me the money. And I paid the clinic directly to ensure Graham received the treatment he needed, without you cutting off his trust fund. The line was silent for a long moment. I could hear the sound of Conrad's heavy, ragged breathing. Vanessa Reed posted that receipt, Conrad finally said, his voice dropping into a dark, terrifying register of old money fury. She attempted to frame you, and in doing so, she exposed my son's medical history to the entire public. She did, I confirmed. I am hosting a birthday dinner for myself this Saturday at the estate, Conrad announced, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. I want you there, Celeste. Bring the ledger. Bring every single receipt. We are going to conduct a full public accounting of this family. And Dominic? Dominic leaned toward the phone. Yes, Uncle Conrad? Bring the assistant, Conrad ordered softly. Tell her if she does not attend, I will have her arrested for corporate extortion by Monday morning. The line went dead. I looked at Dominic. He looked like a man who was walking to the gallows. Sign the divorce papers, Dominic, I advised him quietly, tapping the manila envelope. Because after Saturday night, you won't have a family left to impress. Saturday evening arrived with the heavy, suffocating tension of an impending execution. I drove up to the Greenwich estate just as the sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. I was wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I carried the heavy leather estate ledger in one hand and my thick, red legal folder in the other. When I walked into the grand dining room, the atmosphere was completely different from the night Vanessa had slapped me. There was no catered 5-course meal. There were no extravagant floral centerpieces. Uncle Conrad sat at the absolute head of the table. Dominic sat to his right, looking exhausted and deeply defeated. Beatrice, having been discharged from the hospital the day before, sat to his left, looking unusually pale and quiet, and standing awkwardly at the far end of the table, looking like a prisoner awaiting sentencing, was Vanessa Reed. She was no longer wearing an emerald green gala gown. She was wearing a cheap, slightly wrinkled beige blouse. The manufactured arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, frantic terror. Sit, Celeste, Conrad commanded, gesturing to the chair directly opposite Vanessa at the far end of the table. I sat down. I placed the ledger and the red folder on the polished mahogany wood in front of me. We are not here to celebrate my birthday, Conrad announced, his voice carrying the terrifying, absolute authority of the family patriarch. We are here to conduct a forensic accounting of the Whitmore family's dignity. Starting with the assistant. He turned his piercing gaze to Vanessa. Miss Reed, Conrad said softly, you posted a private financial document to a public social media platform in an attempt to defame my niece-in-law. In doing so, you exposed my son's medical history to the world. Vanessa trembled, tears instantly spilling down her cheeks. Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know what that transfer was for, I swear. I just saw the money going to her and I thought she was stealing. I was trying to protect Dominic. You were trying to protect yourself, I corrected her coldly from the other end of the table. You were trying to distract the family from the $42,000 you stole through vendor fraud. I didn't steal it, Vanessa shrieked, her panic overriding her self-preservation. She pointed a shaking finger at Dominic. He knew! Dominic knew about the caviar. Dominic's head snapped up. What? You're lying. I never authorized you to change the vendor. You didn't authorize it, but you didn't stop me. Vanessa sobbed, the desperation finally breaking her loyalty to him. She was going down, and she was determined to drag him with her. You let me do whatever I wanted, Dominic. You told me I was refreshing. You told me Celeste was too stiff and boring. You let me answer your phone at midnight. You let me plan this memorial tea. You let your mother buy me that dress. She turned to Conrad, her face streaked with tears. He wanted me to act like his wife, Vanessa cried. He wanted me to push the boundaries. He liked the attention. I only slapped her because I thought that's what he wanted. I thought he wanted me to claim my place. The dining room fell into a deathly, profound silence. The truth, ugly and unvarnished, was finally laid bare on the mahogany table. Vanessa wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a deeply insecure, greedy woman who had been handed the keys to the kingdom by a coward. Dominic hadn't just failed to protect me. He had actively groomed his assistant to replace me, feeding her ego until she felt entitled enough to physically assault me in my own home. Conrad looked at Dominic. The disgust in the older man's eyes was absolute. "You are a disgrace to this family, Dominic," Conrad whispered. "You allowed this woman to humiliate your wife, steal from the estate, and expose your cousin's addiction, all because you needed your ego stroked." Dominic buried his face in his hands, unable to look at his uncle, unable to look at me. The golden boy illusion was completely, permanently shattered. "Celeste," Conrad said, turning back to me, "what are your terms regarding Miss Reed?" I opened the red folder. I pulled out 3 documents and slid them down the length of the long table until they stopped in front of Vanessa. "The first document is a cease and desist order," I stated clearly. "You will never speak the name Whitmore, or my name, in public or private again. The second document is a formal written apology for the assault, which you will sign right now in front of these witnesses." Vanessa stared at the papers, her hands shaking violently. "And the third document," I continued, my voice hardening into steel, "is a confession of vendor fraud, accompanied by a promissory note. You will repay the $42,000 you stole within 90 days. If you fail to meet these terms, I will personally fund the civil lawsuit against you, and Conrad will fund the criminal prosecution." I can't," Vanessa sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I don't have the money. My career is ruined. Please, Celeste, I'm so sorry. Sign the apology, Miss Reed," Conrad ordered, his voice echoing like a judge handing down a sentence. "Or my lawyers will have you arrested before you reach the front gate." Vanessa picked up a pen with a trembling hand. She signed the apology. She signed the confession. She signed the promissory note. "Leave," I commanded. Vanessa didn't look at Dominic. She didn't look at Beatrice. She picked up her cheap purse and practically ran out of the dining room, the sound of her heels echoing frantically down the hallway until the heavy front doors slammed shut behind her. She was gone. The interloper was permanently excised from the estate. But my work wasn't finished. I closed the red folder and placed my hands on the vintage leather cover of the estate ledger. "Now," I said, looking at Beatrice and Dominic, "let's talk about the handover." I reached into my blazer pocket. I pulled out a heavy brass key ring. It held the master key to the estate, the access fob for the security gates, and the small silver key to the wine cellar. I placed the keys on the ledger. Next, I pulled out a small encrypted thumb drive. This drive contains the master passwords for the estate's financial accounts, the security camera system, and the payroll portal for the staff, I explained, placing it next to the keys. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy steel access card. "The medicine vault code," I stated, placing it on the pile. Finally, I pulled out the primary estate tablet, the iPad I used to manage the vendors, the landscaping schedules, and the catering contracts. I set it gently on top of the ledger. Beatrice stared at the pile of items. The reality of what was happening finally began to penetrate her aristocratic denial. I wasn't just throwing a tantrum. I wasn't just demanding an apology. I was systematically extracting the entire operational spine of the Whitmore estate. "Celeste," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't do this. I don't know the passwords to the payroll portal. I don't know the landscaping schedule. The house will fall apart." "The house is yours, Beatrice," I replied softly. "You wanted to be the matriarch. You wanted to protect the family dignity. Now you get to do the work." The dining room doors opened. Ruth Bell walked in, carrying a small silver tray. But she wasn't serving drinks. She walked straight over to Conrad and placed a single sealed white envelope on the table in front of him. "What is this?" "Ruth?" Conrad asked, frowning. "It is my 2 weeks' notice, sir," Ruth replied, her voice perfectly steady, though her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I have served the Whitmore family for 20 years. But I served Adelaide, and I served Celeste. I will not serve a family that allows its matriarch to be assaulted at her own table." Beatrice gasped. "Ruth, you can't leave. Who will manage the kitchen?" "You will, ma'am," Ruth replied with terrifying politeness. She bowed slightly, turned, and walked out of the dining room. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in that house. They were looking at the keys. They were looking at the ledger. They were realizing that they didn't know how to run their own lives. For 3 years, they had treated me like a disposable, interchangeable asset, convinced that their name alone was what kept the chandelier shining and the crystal clean. They were wrong. It was my invisible labor. It was my money. It was my grace. And I was taking it all back. The divorce papers are at my attorney's office, Dominic, I said, standing up from the table. I expect them signed by Monday. And Conrad, I expect the wire transfer for the $650,000 by Friday, or the ledger goes public. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to. I turned my back on the Whitmore family and walked out of the dining room. I walked down the long, portrait-lined hallway, through the massive front doors, and out into the cool Greenwich night. I got into my car and drove away from the estate. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. 2 days later, on a rainy Monday afternoon, I sat in the sterile, glass-walled conference room of a high-end Manhattan law firm. My attorney sat beside me, reviewing a stack of documents. The heavy glass door opened, and Dominic walked in. He was accompanied by a junior lawyer who looked incredibly intimidated by my attorney. Dominic looked horrific. He had lost weight in the last week. The arrogant, polished air was gone. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a deserted island. He sat down across from me. He didn't speak. He just looked at me with deep, profound regret. His lawyer slid the divorce agreement across the table. My client is prepared to sign the agreement as drafted, the junior lawyer stated nervously. The Whitmore Trust has authorized the release of the $650,000 to your client's account. The transfer was initiated this morning. My attorney nodded, reviewing the confirmation receipt. Excellent. And the title transfer for Beatrice Whitmore's vintage Mercedes. Completed, the lawyer confirmed, sliding the title across the table. It was over. The financial extraction was complete. The debts were paid. The safety net was permanently severed. Dominic picked up a heavy Mont Blanc pen. His hand was trembling slightly. He hovered the pen over the signature line of the divorce decree. He looked up at me. "Celeste," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking. "If I had defended you that night, if I had thrown Vanessa out the moment she slapped you, would you have stayed?" It was a desperate, heartbreaking question. He was clinging to the hope that the destruction of our marriage was the result of a single, catastrophic mistake, rather than a systemic failure of his character. I looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. "The slap didn't break our marriage, Dominic," I said softly, delivering the final, undeniable truth. "It only showed me who had already broken it. 3 years was already far too slow." Dominic stared at me for a long moment. Then, he lowered his head, pressed the pen to the paper, and signed his name. The marriage was legally terminated. I walked out of the law firm and stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the gray clouds, casting a bright, golden light over the city. I didn't go back to Brooklyn immediately. I walked 5 blocks down Fifth Avenue until I reached a private, high-end jeweler I had known for years. I walked into the quiet, velvet-lined showroom and placed my heavy diamond engagement ring and platinum wedding band on the glass counter. "Mrs. Whitmore," the jeweler greeted me warmly. "How can I help you today? A cleaning, perhaps?" "No," I replied, pulling my debit card from my wallet. "I want you to melt them down." The jeweler blinked, surprised. "Melt them down, ma'am?" "The diamond is a flawless 3-carat piece. It's a magnificent stone." "I want the diamond removed and sold," I instructed calmly. "I want the platinum melted down and recast into a single simple heavy band, and I want an engraving on the inside." The jeweler pulled out a small notepad, recognizing the finality in my voice. "Of course, ma'am. What would you like the engraving to say?" I looked at the rings that had represented 3 years of invisible labor, emotional betrayal, and profound disrespect. They had been the symbol of my entry into a family that had used me as a shield and a wallet. But they were also the symbol of the woman who had survived them. "I want it to say," I smiled, feeling truly, completely free for the first time in 3 years. Celeste Arden, my maiden name. A month later, the new ring arrived at my Brooklyn apartment. I slipped the heavy platinum band onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. The Whitmore estate, predictably, plunged into chaos. Without my financial backing and Ruth's meticulous management, the facade of old money wealth rapidly deteriorated. Beatrice was forced to sell the vintage Mercedes I had seized to cover the property taxes she could no longer afford. Dominic's reputation in the corporate world took a massive hit when the gossip of his disastrous affair and his family's financial desperation inevitably leaked into the Greenwich Country Club circles. Vanessa vanished from New York entirely. Last seen working as a receptionist at a mid-tier real estate firm in New Jersey. Her dreams of high society dominance permanently shattered by a $42,000 debt she was still paying off. As for me, I didn't look back. I didn't need the mahogany chair at the head of the table to prove my worth. The head of the table was never just a piece of furniture. It was the person carrying the weight. And when I stopped carrying their weight, they collapsed under it. So tell me honestly, if your partner allowed a stranger to publicly humiliate you, and their family expected you to swallow the insult to keep the peace, would you fight for your seat at their table? Or would you quietly close the ledger, cut the safety net, and let them discover exactly how much your silence was costing them? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.